This is the Authentic Change Podcast, and I am Mike Horne. Authenticity reflects what we want from each other and our organizations: open communication, trust, community, fun, and opportunity. I want to help you to do your best in your personal and professional relationships. This podcast delivers expertise, insights, and approaches on authentic leadership, to live your purpose, to lead from your values, to establish connected relationships, to steward people and culture change, to build and sustain prosperity, and to open doors and possibilities. This podcast will assist you in paving the way forward to personal, team, and organizational prosperity.
Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast with Mike Horne. I am absolutely delighted today to welcome as our guest Dr. John Bennett. John has so many paths. As we were preparing for the show discussion, I said, John, we can take our discussion around authenticity and integrity in so many directions. John, in one hand, is the director of graduate programs. He's a professor of behavioral science at the McColl School of Business at Queen's University of Charlotte. And that is one of John's roles, two of John's roles, professor, program director. He's also president of Lawton Associates, and he's been at that work for almost a quarter century now. And I'll let John say more about that. John's a member of the board of trustees of the Fielding Graduate University. And it's just a delight to welcome John to today's episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horne. John, could you say a few words about yourself?
Well, thank you, Mike, for inviting me to be a part of this and the work that you're doing to foster authenticity, integrity, and effective leadership. And I often tell people who want me to introduce myself that I have a patch quilt kind of background, that if you look at the pieces, they may not make sense, but if you put the kind of bigger picture view, I think the pieces fit together in a nice mosaic that seems to make sense to me. So I actually started my professional career working for the American Red Cross. I spent 18 years with the Red Cross, and in that time was also the last 8 years, I was CEO for regional biomedical operations in a couple of locations, and had just a really rich experience of working with human services and then biomedical services in providing pharmaceutical products in the form of blood and tissue products. And in that, I had the opportunity of doing a great deal of program development work, organizational change work, developing the capacity of leaders, doing a turnaround experience as well, doing some merger and acquisition work. And in that time, I was also realizing that where I wanted to spend my efforts and my attention was to help more than one organization. And how could I broaden that? And that led me back to school and to a doctoral program and the opportunity to learn more of the theory that I had been putting in practice for so many years. I left the Red Cross and started my own consulting practice, as you mentioned, and was doing executive coaching before I think some of that was as popular and widespread as it is today. And that was back in 1997. And since then, I've had the fortune of working with so many different leaders and organizations across all sectors. And that has been just a fabulous both opportunity to have impact, but also a tremendous learning experience. And then I had the opportunity of doing some teaching, and I realized that the idea of teaching and consulting and coaching were incredibly powerful ways to have the impact on so many people and so many organizations. And that's truly been what I've spent the last 25 years doing. And that's just a tremendous opportunity. Developing programs, expanding graduate programs, working with graduate students has just been a delight. And today I spend my time primarily teaching, doing the typical academic research and writing kinds of things. And then I do have my own coaching and consulting practice. And so I keep my hands in both camps and consider myself to be a pracademic, one who is the theory to practice and practice to theory. That's kind of my motto.
Oh, that's great, John. It's a really lovely way of introducing yourself to our audience and for our audience to get to know you. One thing I am curious about is you were at the Red Cross for a long time, more than 10 years. What kept you there so long? I'm curious. In addition to doing the fascinating work that you were doing, relative to blood tissues and all kinds of things.
Well, it's a great question. In fact, I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that question. So you're prompting me to think about something that I hadn't articulated perhaps in this way. What's striking me is one thing was I had some incredible mentors that gave me opportunities that stretched me beyond what I thought my capabilities were, and at the same time giving me opportunities to learn and grow, and sometimes do that in a way that didn't work so well, and sometimes in ways that worked well. I'm a believer that you learn a great deal by falling off the bicycle as well as riding on it on smooth roads. So that was a big piece. I think another was just a commitment to the mission. And so often I think leaders lose sight of that value and the importance of mission orientation. And whatever that is, it really, for me, brings in, we talk about authenticity and having integrity. It is about, can I align myself with the work that's being done? And however that fits into your life mission. And then I think a third piece that I would say is the opportunity to help the organization both at a regional level as well as a corporate level assimilate through some incredible changes that were happening both in terms of our regulatory world as well as our market world that was happening, and changes in technology that were happening. And all of those things for me is exciting when you are leading change and building capacity. I often say to my coaching clients and to my consulting clients that if you just want to create a change, if you just want to do something, I'm probably not the right person to work with you. If on the other hand, you want to build the capacity for the change that's likely to come next, then I'm really willing to work with you. Because I think it's more important that it's important that we implement whatever an organization's changes are, but at the same time, we have to build the capacity for future change. And that's what gets me excited. And that's part of what kept me at the Red Cross. Those three things, I think, for so many years.
Yeah. I think about the change issue, and particularly in terms of we really can help people. People often know what they want, sometimes they know what they want, but what are they able to do with that want, as a leader in an organization? So if you know what you want and you have a way that includes and involves people, how do we help people to close that gap? And it sounds like, some of the things that we can learn from your experience, one is have a mentor.
Yes.
You benefited from the experience of mentors, and you also talked about a commitment to a mission. And as you described that third element, it was something bigger than yourself. You talked about helping the organization. That was bigger than John. And that's a nice framework to think about issues of authenticity in mentors, this commitment to the mission, and about helping an organization. All of that maybe reflects some of what you described or discussed in terms of authenticity and integrity and leadership. And how does that weave into the storied career that you've had?
Well,
are having.
Yeah, it has, and it's still very much alive. I'm somewhat committed to an organization, often to the detriment of my own well-being, which can be, so you get so committed to that. I'm reminded of two things. One, when I was in college, I had the opportunity of being actively involved in a lot of student activities on campus, and that served as a great learning ground for me, those early experiences. And I look back on them fondly, and I remember at the end of one academic year, somebody that a fellow student had made little plaques for everybody. In fact, I think I still have mine. And this is, 40 years ago. And the plaque that she gave me was organization. And it wasn't about being organized, was that she called out that my commitment to the organization was a big guiding factor for me. And that is, the commitment to the organization, its mission, its work. And that has served me so well going forward. And I think whenever leaders can't align themselves with what the business is, whether that's for-profit, not-for-profit, or government organization, when you can't do that, then you have a mismatch, and it's likely to show up. My experience is that it shows up as a lack of energy, a lack of enthusiasm, a lack of desire to take risk, and the kinds of things that just make work as opposed to meaningful work. And when we think about authenticity, that alignment is so critical to what leaders need to have.
Oh, sure. I agree. And I think it's particularly as we enter this endemic COVID endemic environment, we need people to reach out and form communities in new ways to make organizations work. And I think that one of the ways to do that is by the exercise of authentic leadership and bringing more of that into the world. And, I think we have to tackle a couple of questions is, what does it mean when we're describing integrity, and what does it mean when we're describing authenticity? And I think for me, when I think about integrity, I think about those, integrity gets tested all of the time over life. There are tests in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s, and those tests continue. And as you think about integrity, what we often think about is we think about the whole cloth. If you were an engineer, you'd probably say it's something about things hanging together well, that things hang together. But authenticity differs from integrity in that it's about congruency, right? Do my words and actions match? And even better when the ways of thinking and our words and actions match. And I think one of the ways that leaders do that, because you reminded me that when you described your collegiate experiences and always being involved in activities, leaders are always leading, right? Is that your sense of things? I mean, it's like ask a busy person to do something. And typically, for better or worse, I think that there are reinforcements that we receive for these acts of leading, and those reinforcements make us persist in choosing to lead over the course of a lifetime.
Yes, in a couple of things I'll comment on there. One about just the idea of what is integrity and what does that mean? And my working definition comes from a model of trust. And one of the ways that trust we think about as being so foundational to a relationship. And when relationships don't work, that's the first question I ask is, where's trust? And there's a framework of definition of trust that is the combination of integrity, competence, and benevolence. And those are not new; those are not my thoughts, but it's a model that I buy into. And when I think about those three being the three legs of the stool of trust, do I believe you are competent and capable of doing whatever you're doing in our relationship as a member of a team? As an organization, does the organization have that capacity? And then the second piece is, does it have my best interest? Are you going to push me out of the way of the oncoming train, or are you going to push me into it? Kind of basic question. And then the third piece around integrity for me is, do you do what you say you're going to do, when and how you say you're going to do it? And when those three things are in place, I find that I trust people and people trust me. And when those are not in play, I think one of the questions that I ask myself is not only which part of those is not in place, but why is it not for me? Because I may not want a relationship with you. Ooh, that's a tough one. Or we may not have the relationship with our customers as a company because we have not exhibited one of those three things. And anytime one of those three legs of the stool is damaged, the trust is eroded and it's hard to rebuild.
Yes, and people often ask me, "Is it okay to tell a lie?" At work, and I go, well, why are you asking me that question? That's kind of crazy. But what I do know is that what I've observed is that when people aren't honest and upfront and transparent, then trust erodes, and it's difficult to go beyond the next step. I think of trust really as an action. A behavioral action that arises out of a set of humanistic values. It's an action step in creating authentic leadership, that I create an environment that I trust that I can influence my manager or my leader, and that my manager or leader can be influenced, and that we affect that trust by opening up communication, by making it more transparent, by replacing guarded and cautious communication as a way of engaging. What I'd be curious about, because you bring such great organization experience to this conversation, John, is to think about, how does that scale? How does my going beyond the power of a community of three, right, which often contains many of the seeds for innovation in organizations, just probably as you did, in helping the organization. No heroic effort, right? But always done in collaboration with someone else or with some team. But how do we begin to scale that? I mean, how do you think about that? How would you teach students around that, or what would open up that?
One of those responses I'm about to have is one of those, let me answer this before I answer that kind of response here. Because I think one of the things that we also need to bookmark, at least as it relates to building trust and building integrity, is that there are times when relationships are not built on trust. They will not, their trust is not present. This has been very, very hard lesson for me to learn. There are people who have done things that we all know, and we go, there's something I can't trust about them. It's very hard to restore that. And what I've had a difficult time personally dealing with is, and then letting go of that. There's no amount of resuscitation at some point that you can give to that relationship. And it's very hard for me to walk away in these relationships when it happens. But what I've also discovered is not walking away from it is also painful. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so.
Now, how do we scale all of this? That's a great question. I don't know if I have a magic answer to that. What I do know is that I believe when I teach coaching, or as I was this weekend teaching a course on interpersonal and group dynamics, is that if I can help a few students who become leaders, or I can work in a coaching relationship with leaders and help them to build self-awareness, to build skills and capacity, that they will then impact a cascading effect. We do a lot of work with school system leaders, as an example, and I think of them, I often will end those programs that we do by saying something along the lines of, if you're the principal of a school that has, let's say, 1,000 students in it, you're not only impacting the 75 staff that you have in that school, or 100 staff, whatever the number might be, but you're also impacting those 1,000 students. And each one of those has a family. And so by impacting the 75 staff and the 1,000 students, you're having a cascading impact that lives far beyond the year that they're with you, or the interaction that you have. And I think, to me, that's where we began. I use the phrase, we're going to tilt the axis of the universe.
Right. You begin with the greater good in those words. And I think organizationally, you can also think about in the for-profit organization, when people have disputes over facts or methods or processes, not so much values, I don't think. But even with values, you can always encourage people to look up to, a common stakeholder. That can often be a gap or a bridge relative to making a leap to a call to a higher purpose.
hmm Well, it's a call to a higher purpose, but it's also realizing the impact. I don't need to directly impact in that example that I gave of, I don't have to directly impact 1,000 people. But what I do by being an effective leader is cascade that by my words and my actions and by what I put in place as systems, what I put in place as values, how we hold each other accountable for some things that will foster positive growth in individuals, in teams, and ultimately in organizations into enterprises, and beyond that into our more social system. So
Mhm.
I think of it as nested systems that are
Mhm.
all interacting with each other and have the opportunity that a leader may have a relatively small circle of people that they're directly touching, but the impact of those touches, what do you do with them? What's the best use, the highest and best use of that leader's time to build the capacity of others to do good work? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, so powerful as a way of thinking about the influence that leaders have in organizations, sometimes intended and sometimes unintended as well.
hmm
Those effects. What I wonder about is that in some organizations, you'll encounter people who are not vested in your success.
hmm
That and maybe you describe it in terms of, I don't want a relationship, or this relationship is not going to work for me. How do
hmm
we, bring or appeal to the common good or to the common stakeholder when there are plenty of people who aren't vested in the success in the development of others?
hmm I think it becomes a value that we have to ask ourselves in organizations, do we value that? Is that something that we think is important? And if so, how do we hire for it? How do we reward for it? How do we hold people accountable? And the other part is, how do we develop their capacity to exhibit and live that value? And then also the tough question of, what do we do when somebody doesn't? And it may be that they're very good people. They may have a tremendous skill, but they may just not fit with our belief system. And I don't encourage organizations to have a narrow belief system. That's detrimental as well. We want to build a big tent. But the other side of that is, if you decide to play in our organization, if you come to our ballpark, so to speak, then you're going to play the game that's here. You don't go to the baseball field and play soccer. The field is not designed for it. And organizations need to be designed for what they're trying to accomplish. And that means having team players who play that sport, to use that image a bit
Right.
further.
And it returns to the topic of values and how those are distributed, how they're embodied in individuals and in the organization. Because, there are so many great examples, I think, of organizations where values have been on the walls and not in the halls, I think, as the
Mm-hmm.
expression goes. You think about the classic Enron example. I mean, integrity was the number one value in that organization. Didn't really
Mm-hmm.
mean anything. And more recently with Wells Fargo, somewhat
Mm-hmm.
similar. And, going back to this notion of, let's look at what's changed in executive compensation with golden parachutes. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you can be let go of a leadership role in an organization, like the recent stories at McDonald's or previously at United Airlines, and still have a severance package that rewards you
Mm-hmm.
despite the conduct or the behavior that you encouraged or that
Mm-hmm.
violated the organization's values.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we're constantly learning how to compensate and reward people and how that's structured. I mean, I want to believe that the compensation committees of those boards had had not thought through what would we do if. So yes, I mean the structure was put in place, and while I think there's a big gap between executive compensation and employees doing the grunt work of the organization, doing the real nuts and bolts on the ground kind of work, there's a huge gap in that compensation structure. On the other hand, there's a level of responsibility that those executives have that the line employee doesn't have. And there's an accountability and the ability to attract and retain people. And at the same time, we have to begin to really continually think about what are we rewarding. And it may be that the entire sets of compensation need to be lined up more thoroughly and clearly with what do we mean by integrity? What do we mean by performance? And how do we help people to know what is expected of them, and then how do we reward and compensate them, and how do we make adjustments when they don't meet those expectations as well? So
sure, and integrity arises out of some moral and ethical foundation, and perhaps I'm not quite sure of the current statistic, but it was something to the effect of 66% of the Fortune 250 had integrity as one of its core values. And there are so many examples where you see that is out of alignment. And, again, that goes to the notion that integrity is really about the notes that happen in our life, and authenticity is that tempo, because when we're congruent in thoughts and actions and more in ways of thinking, then generally we're happier. And that, stems from, again, having an experience with somebody who is genuine, who does hang together. So the concepts, may be related, but they're distinct, right? And I think what we also know is that people enjoy working with and for happy people. And, this is not the kind of happiness that occurs because of the, I found a new boyfriend, or I found a new girlfriend, or a new partner, but it's a sort of sustained happiness that that prevails.
Yeah. I mean, don't we all like to be around happy people? Don't we like to be around content people? I think the pandemic has also brought forth for us an opportunity to think about what makes us happy.
Yes, and this is where the whole idea of self-awareness comes in. I think that
absolutely. And I was saying the other day, I said, I made the comment, I think we made it through this pandemic at this point relatively well. At home, we haven't had we've been in relatively close quarters, limited exposure to other people. Would I say that that's the happiest time of my life? Absolutely not. But on the other hand, what we've also seen is people have been unemployed and are really questioning, what do I want to do with my life? And organizations are having to think about whether it's the recent examples of social unrest and injustice, and companies beginning to get a better handle on what we mean by social responsibility. What does it mean to have a diverse workforce? What does it mean to have an inclusive workforce? What does it mean to pay attention to climate change, as an example? And what role do companies play in these kinds of really big issues? And what we do know is that the next generation, and I think, two or three generations away from me, age-wise, but the next set of employees that are going to be entering the workforce have different expectations about what work is, what their role in the companies are, what kind of work they want to do, and what they expect those companies to do for not only themselves, but for the broader society. And the more we can pay attention to these things, it's an evolution. It's not going to be a revolution. Companies have existed for a long time the way they are, and these kind of changes take time, but they're being pushed. And I think that's an exciting piece, is that so many companies are looking at things today that they never imagined looking at 20 years ago.
Yes, and it's so interesting to me how it aligns with where we began our discussion today on the podcast around some of those key attractors for you in carrying out your mission. And you mentioned about having mentors. You mentioned about a commitment to a mission, something something that was important, that's based on values. And the third thing that you mentioned was this, greater than, let's help the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So it's less a question about what do we want to do, but how can we help? And that's a different orientation, I think, for many to wrap their heads around, and perhaps, brings us closer to being able to bring more of who we are when we can genuinely attach to the mission.
Absolutely. And as we're looking at how organizations are getting in touch with, we don't hire robots. We might have robots, but we have people, and people are different. And the more we can recognize our humanness, our individuality, our collectiveness, our common bonds, I think the more we're going to be able to effectively work together, create environments where people feel like they fit and that are able to connect with each other around shared mission. And that's exciting to me. And I think we've got a workforce that's going to demand it, and organizations are needing to respond, and many are. Yeah.
Yeah. Out of a set of humanistic values, I think one of them is that we grow inclusiveness around us, right? We have diverse ideas and diverse people around us in order to grow inclusiveness. And that becomes one of the core values that drives a lot of the work. One of the saddest things, just as we begin to close our podcasting for today, John, is one of the saddest things I remember in one organization was an executive saying to me, Mike, if we could figure out a way to make money without people, we would. I always thought, oh my goodness, people are at the center of all organizational activity. All human enterprise relies on people.
Yeah, and I will often say to clients, let's take a look at your operating budget. What's your single largest line item? And in most organizations, it is people. And then I ask the follow-up question. I'll bet for every piece of equipment that you have, every piece of equipment, whether it's the air handler or it's some piece of machinery that's making something or any other part of the business, your computer technology and so forth, you have preventive maintenance. You have a cycle of replacing equipment. You have a period of regrouping and retooling. Do you have an equivalent amount of energy and effort and resources applied to your single largest line item as you do to all of those? And the answer almost every time is no, we don't. We spend more on maintaining and upgrading our equipment than we do on upgrading our single largest line item, our people. And there's the opportunity, I think.
Yes, and that is a great way to begin to wrap up, is to think about opportunity, what I frame as how do we move from possibility to probability. And John, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, how would they get in touch with you? What are the ways for people to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. Love for them to. My website is lawton-associates.com. LAWTON-associates.com. My email address is john@lawton-associates.com. And I'd be happy to chat with anyone, connect with anyone. And certainly if I can be of help to you or them, I'd be more than happy to do so.
John, that's all wonderful. And I want to thank you for the generosity of your time today, from your perspectives. This has been a thought-provoking discussion on the topics of authenticity and integrity and leadership. And I'm so glad to have been part of a conversation that elevated my view on thinking about this and how to scale. Once again, everyone, thank you so much for listening to podcast Authentic Change with Mike Horne.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll subscribe today and tell a friend about our show. If you're looking for hands-on help to increase your success through authentic change, or have a question you'd like to hear me answer here, please email me at mike@mike-horne.com.